This is Clark the Knife, and this is answering a single question, which is why do I like the Hinderer XM-18 Skinny so much more than the Hinderer XM-18 Full Thickness? I got full reviews on both of these knives, and what you'll see is that the XM-18 Full Thickness is heavily qualified in that review. There are parts of the XM-18 that I really, really like. The ergonomic lines are exceptional. The fit and finish, amazing. The action, as good as you're going to get at the $400 to $500 price point. But there were also things that I really didn't like. It's a brick in the pocket. You know, it's big, it's heavy for not a huge knife. And the cutting performance is abysmal, among the worst that I've had in a production knife. The XM-18 Skinny, I call the best Hinderer for most people. And I gave it one of the highest scores I've given any knife. And I also said, and still stand by the fact that it is probably in the running with the Chris Reeve Semenza for being my sort of desert island knife, what will be the one knife that I would take if I had to reduce my collection down to a single knife. So why is the Skinny version so much better? The lines are identical, the fit and finish is identical. They're still Hinderers. They both got tri-way. It really comes down to three things, three major differences, all of which favor the Skinny. And those three differences are 1, ergonomics, 2, carry, and 3, cutting performance. And we're going to go through them in that order. That's from sort of least significant difference up to most significant difference. So first, let's talk ergonomics. The ergonomic lines, let me get a little bit more light here, brighten this up a bit. The ergonomic lines on the XM-18 Skinny and the XM-18 are identical. It's the exact same shape from this profile. And when you're in hard use, I'm just going to focus on the full size here, they are just as good. When you are really bearing down on this XM-18 Full Thickness, it rolls into your palm really nicely. All these choils, all these grooves fit the hand very securely. This thing does not want to move. It's going to stay in your hand, and when you really bear down on something, whether you're stabbing, whether you're pulling, dragging, you know, all these grips, your choked up grip, your pinch grip, your full grip back here, when you're really bearing down on this knife, it does not want to budge in your hand, and that's awesome. It feels as secure in the hand as any knife in the entire industry, or at least any knife that I have handled. The problem with this full thickness one is it is a thick knife. I mean, this is thicker, significantly thicker if you look at it butt to butt than your PM2. This is way thicker than anything from Chris Reeve. This is way thicker than probably anything that Benchmade makes. Actually, the Griptilian and the Adamas are pretty thick, so maybe not, but it's a thick knife. And the problem with big, thick, heavy knives like this is that this knife starts to feel awkward for lighter tasks. When you want to just do something like, you know, open an Amazon package, or you want to just get into a little, you know, cut a little zip tie or cut a little twine or something like that. A big, thick handle like this, it's handle heavy, and it's just a big object in your hand. There is nothing nimble about this handle. You feel like you're sort of fighting the weight of the knife anytime you move it anywhere, and it's just because it's so big in your hand and so thick, it's super secure when you push it hard, but when you just want to do little things, it really does feel like overkill, and it's not quite as easy to just, you know, roll around in your hand, to just, you know, pinch and just sort of grab it and do whatever you need. All that light duty stuff feels a little awkward with the full thickness XM-18. When you bring in the Skinny version, you have the exact same ergonomic lines, and even though it is skinnier in the blade and skinnier in the handle scales, which, by the way, just to show the difference here, I mean, we're talking a decent bit skinnier in the blade, but if you look at the handles, comparing them here, it is quite a bit skinnier in the handles than the full thickness XM-18. All the ergonomic lines of the XM-18 work just as well in this Skinny version. And when I choke up and bear down on something, this still doesn't want to move in my hand. It's not bitey, it's not sharp anywhere. It feels secure. I feel these flats, I feel these edges. It wants to stay in my hand. It doesn't want to move, even if I stab, even if I drag it through stuff, pull it through stuff. You know, I can pinch up really easily, do those narrow cuts. Everything that is great about the handle ergonomics of the XM-18 platform, all of that remains 100% as true with the skinny version. But then the skinny version on top of that, the handle is lighter, and the whole knife is lighter, and the weight is a little bit more toward the blade. You feel that when you pick it up. On top of that, it is just a smaller object in your hand. And as a result, it feels much more versatile. It is much easier if I've got this in my pocket and I just want to, cut some of that Amazon tape or break down a box. It's easier to just pop this open, grab it however I want to, and just get the blade immediately where I want to do that cut. I'm not moving as much weight. I'm not moving as big of an object around in my palm. It's easier for me to, just climb up and just grab this blade. There's not as much handle hanging out behind here. It's just, this is a knife that is even easier to climb up and down, even easier to control the blade, even easier to get this knife wherever you want to. And so it ends up being a better ergonomic experience, specifically because your skinny version still has all of the extraordinary ergonomic strengths of the full thickness XM-18. And if you want to hear about those more in detail, I've got lengthy full reviews of both of these knives. You can go through either of those. I go through that in detail in both of them, but the extraordinary ergonomics of the full thickness XM-18, every bit of the positives are present with the skinny version. But then on top of that, that lightness and that thinness makes it so much easier to use for those lighter duty tasks that it just does feel so much more versatile. And so there's a significant ergonomic improvement in practice. It's an easier knife to use. Second thing is carry. And I think this one is pretty obvious. I mean, you look at how much, let's see if I can get this to stand. No, I cannot get it to stand, but I'll hold them like that. Look at how much thinner that knife is, the skinny. I mean, you are talking a knife that is a lot thinner, that goes from being a thick, chunky knife to being a legitimately thin knife in the pocket. There's about an ounce of weight savings when you shave everything down, but it really is that thinness that makes the carry profile of the skinny so much better. When you make a knife that is this relative size, which is not a small knife, but not a big knife either, and then you make it skinny, you make this whole object just take up less real estate in your pocket. And so where this, because it's so thick, kind of feels like it takes up the whole pocket, this is thin enough that you can easily have other stuff in your pocket alongside of it. You don't feel it swinging around in your pocket nearly as much all day, and it's not because it's that much lighter, it's not. It's because it's so much thinner. It fits more nicely against your leg, in your shorts or your pants or wherever you're carrying it. It fits more nicely alongside other stuff. It's just a less obtrusive object. This, the full size, is a big knife that feels like a big knife. I mean, honestly, even though it's a smaller knife, there isn't that much of a difference in carry profile in terms of feel between your Demco AD20S and your full thickness XM-18, because they're both big, thick knives. They both feel like big, thick knives in the pocket. And honestly, you're getting more blade out of your AD20S. You're getting a bigger knife out of your AD20S than you are with your full thickness XM-18. But the skinny, it's got the same sort of thing that the Spidey Chef has going, where because it's thin, it slides in and out of the pocket easily, it disappears in the pocket easily, and it's just so much nicer to carry. And when it's nicer to carry, that means you'll carry it more. And when you'll carry it more, that means you'll use it more. And so I just ended up using, I never wanted to carry my full thickness XM-18. It felt like a boat anchor. This has become literally my most carried knife since I really got to know it. Last part, which is the biggest one, cutting performance. You would think, so the difference in blade stock, it's a 20% reduction in blade stock roughly. You're going from 165 thousandths, which is pretty thick, to 140 thousandths, which is the same thickness as a PM2. So even the skinny version here, an XM-18 skinny, is not 3.5 inch, is not a skinny knife. This is not a thin knife. This is still as thick as all of Spyderco's hard use knives. This is as thick as a PM2. This is as thick as a Shaman, as thick as a Yojimbo, all that sort of stuff. It's as thick as an Inkosi. You know, when I take this skinny and I compare it to an Inkosi, that blade stock is just as thick as an Inkosi. But going from 165 thousandths to 140 thousandths is the difference that makes it so that this goes from being a abysmal cutter with in the 165 thousandths, where even if you put a really good edge on it, I have not found a way to turn a full thickness XM-18 into a performance cutter. Whereas if you take the skinny one, you need to lay the edge back. You're still not going to like the factory edge, but you can make this knife cut well. Just like you can make a PM2 cut well, just like you can make an Inkosi cut well, if you put the right edge on it. You can make this knife with these decent Hinderer grinds. They're not great grinds, they're beautiful grinds. And they're grinds that sort of hit that balance between hard use and sliciness. I shouldn't say that they're bad grinds. They are grinds that are not optimized for sliciness. But even with that grind, you take that blade stock down and you put a 17 degree edge, maybe even a 16 or 15 degree edge on here, this knife will slice. And sliciness, especially when you're talking like not a thin slicing knife like a TRM Atom. I mean, there are obviously levels to sliciness. But when you're talking about a knife that you want to be a versatile EDC, sliciness is kind of a step function in the fact that if a knife is slicey enough to do all the things that you need a knife to do, then improvements over that in terms of sliciness are cool, but a lot of them are sort of aesthetic in a way. They make the knife feel higher performance, they make it feel cooler. They're not strictly necessary as long as it cuts well enough. Like the Native is a perfect example of this, the Spyderco Native. This thing cuts really, really well in the sense that it cuts well enough for any task that I would need. It's not an extraordinary slicer, it's not a grape shaver, but they kept decently thick stock and made it cut as well as I would need for any task I would ever need. The XM-18 Skinny, unlike the XM-18 Full Thickness, meets that goal. As a general use EDC knife, it can cut everything that you would need as well as you need it to cut. There is no EDC task that is going to be too fine, too delicate, or require such a slicey edge that the XM-18 Skinny will not be able to do it once you put a good edge on it yourself. Again, you have to know how to sharpen because Hinderer will put their damn 20 to 25 degree factory edges on there and blow the performance of the knife. But at least this one you can sharpen to get a good edge on it. The XM-18 Full Thickness, you need a regrind to make it actually work well. And even then, it's hard to understand. Like, it's a relatively short blade with thick blade stock. I don't know if a regrind would even solve it, or if it would, you'd have to put some crazy hollow grind on there that sort of defeats the purpose of having an XM-18. By that point, just get a different knife. So the Skinny, it sort of crosses a chasm in that the Skinny is slicey enough for most tasks that you need in an EDC knife, and the Full Thickness simply is not. And from a performance perspective, that makes all the difference in the world, because that means that you can carry a Skinny and it can do everything you need a knife to do when the Full Thickness can't. So that relatively small reduction in blade stock, again, going from only 165 down to 140, makes a massive, massive difference in utility. And the thing that I want to call out is that, I'll flip these over to the show side, I don't think you're actually really losing any of the toughness the Hinderers are known for. I've talked about this in some of my other Hinderer reviews. I think that this Skinny should be the standard thickness for the XM-18 because even for the crazy hard use stuff that Hinderer has made their reputation on, even for the first responder stuff, the firefighter stuff, the EMT stuff, the I'm cutting myself out of a car as it's driving off a cliff and about to run into a glacier, like all of that stupid stuff that people like to talk about that they want to be able to theoretically do with their XM18s. I find it hard to believe that there are any of those tasks with modern blade steels, and frankly, making a full thickness XM18 in 20 CV is dumb. That's a really dumb steel for that knife profile. But anyway, let's say this was S45 VN or Magna Cut, frankly even S35 VN. 20 CV makes a little bit more sense in the skinny version, but any standard blade steels that you're going to see these Hinderers in, they are tough enough. 140,000 blade stock is not thin. Again, that's as thick as the Inkosi, which is Chris Reeves' harder use knife. That is as thick as the PM2, which everybody knows as a hard use knife. It's the same thickness as the military. It's thicker than the Demco AD20S. It's thinner than the full-size AD20, but it's thicker than the AD20S. Like, that is thick enough blade stock for anything you feasibly need a folding knife for. There are no tasks that you should be using a folding knife for where 140,000 blade stock in S45 VN or Magna Cut will not be able to handle the task. And with Hinderers, you don't have to worry about the pivot. The Hinderer pivots are super tough, especially with these blade stops. The frame locks are super tough. Everything about these knives is still super tough. Thinning out the scales does nothing to make them any less robust. This knife still has every bit of a claim to being the kind of super, super tough, super hard use knife that a full thickness XM18 does. I don't realistically think, again, with today's blade steels, you're giving up anything in terms of performance, even in those extreme conditions. And by the time you get to those extreme conditions where you would see a difference between 140,000s and 165,000s blade stock, you probably shouldn't be using a folding knife, and you're probably more worried about things like lock failure or pivot failure than you are worried about blade failure. So, for all those reasons, I really do think the Hinderer XM18 Skinny is simply a better version of the knife. The only reason that you would want to choose there are only two reasons I can think of that you would want to choose a full thickness. I guess three. I'll be charitable, I'll give three. One, which is the dumb reptilian brain reason, but it is a true reason. Some people just like big, thick knives. They like to have a big chunk of steel in their pocket. That's an aesthetic thing. Cool. If you want a thicker knife, go get a thicker knife. Go get a Medford. Like, if you want a big, thick knife. That's one reason to get it. Two, there are some blade shapes that only exist in the full thickness version and don't exist yet in the skinny version. The recurve is one of them. This recurve would probably be fantastic in the skinny version, but it does not yet exist in the skinny version. Skinny version has had slicer, spear point, harpoon spanto, which makes no sense, but it looks cool. Skinner has been there. Sheep's foot has been there. The sheep's foot in the skinny version is exceptional. That's a really, really good knife. Spanto makes no sense in skinny. So I guess there hasn't been a skinny Bowie. That's it, now that I think about it. And, if you look at stuff like the Sparrow grind and stuff like that, they haven't had those in the skinny. So you know what? If you want a Bowie or you want a Sparrow grind, then you have to get a full thickness. But realistically, there's also just more general availability of full thickness XM18s in whatever grind you want. Skinnies come out more rarely because business reasons. Hinderer still, because of the idea people have in their head, Hinderer still has an easier time, it seems, selling full thickness XM18s than skinny ones, even though, as I'm explaining here, I believe the full thickness is simply an inferior knife. And then the third reason that you might want a full thickness is there are more aftermarket parts, both from Hinderer and from third parties, for the full thickness XM18 than the skinny one, for the same reason that I just mentioned. There are a lot more full thickness XM18s out there in the market than there are skinny versions, so there's much more of an incentive to make those aftermarket parts for them. That says nothing about the quality of the knife. It just means simply that there's a bigger market, there's a bigger secondary market, and a bigger secondary market for parts. But all three of those reasons that I just mentioned are aesthetic. The only one that's not aesthetic is that there's more availability of the full thickness versions than the skinny ones, which is unfortunate, but it is true, and it's something that I hope Hinderer starts to change over time. They do seem to be ramping up production in general, so maybe we'll get more skinny versions in general. In every single functional area that these knives differ, the skinny version is superior, and I believe very close to objectively superior, because I think the reasons that the full thickness would be theoretically superior, which would be, maybe things like action would be better. It's not. Maybe things like, toughness under hard use would be better. Again, I don't really envision any scenario where actually the toughness of the full thickness makes any difference versus how tough this skinny version is. This skinny version, if it wasn't called the skinny, put it this way, if the skinny version had come out first and the full thickness was the fatty, everybody would still be saying that the Skinny XM-18 is one of the toughest, hardest use knives on the market. Everybody would still be talking about how robust the build quality is, how it's absolutely impossible to break. Everything they talk about the full thickness, they would be saying the same thing about the Skinny if the Skinny was the default. And so for every functional reason, I believe that the Skinny XM-18 is simply superior to the full thickness. And I'll say it one more time for the purpose of this video. I really wish that Hinderer would make 165 thousandths the fatty thickness, would make 140 thousandths the standard thickness, and then would have a legitimately skinny version that had 120 or 125 thousandths blade stock. That, especially now they've started to introduce hollow grinds, Hinderer could make some extraordinarily slicey knives that still have that robust Hinderer build quality, and those would be some really, really impressive, really, really distinctive EDC options. I don't think that's actually going to happen. I think that is a total pipe dream. The only place that you can get that is, the 3-inch version, the 3-inch skinny is, I think they even went down to 110 or 115,000 for that, but that thing is barely ever available. They made it a liner lock. It's a totally different sort of knife. I just wish they would do that with the 3.5 inch, but that's just a dream. I'm just having a little dream. For right now, this is as good as the XM-18 gets, and frankly, I think that this is as good as Hinderer gets. And I think that Hinderer's best really does come down to, and I promise, I did not coordinate these both being blue. Hinderer's best knives come down to 2 knives right now, and frankly, these are 2 of the best knives in the market at the moment. If you want a general use EDC, get the XM-18 3.5. Skinny, because this thing will do everything you need. It will do everything better than the full thickness version, and it is truly just an incredibly versatile and incredibly useful EDC knife. And if you want a big, tough Hinderer, you want that big burly man performance, then don't get a full thickness XM-18. Get a knife that actually cuts, which is the Hinderer Project X, which is not that much bigger, not that much heavier, but the blade performance is in a completely different dimension in the Project X compared to the XM-18 full thickness. And you can see my full review of the Project X for that. Both of these, extremely recommendable knives. And so those are my thoughts. That's why I think that this skinny version should be the default XM-18 and is just better than the full thickness. Now, I just need to wait around for a skinny Eclipse. I would love to have a skinny Eclipse. I would also love to see some skinnies with hollow grinds. Those would be very cool. Hinderer, it's not going to happen, but I can dream. Anyway, those are my thoughts. Hope you found this valuable, insightful, or at least thought-provoking, or at minimum a little bit entertaining for 20-25 minutes of your time. Hope you found it a good use of your time, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. This has been Clark the Knife. Bye-bye.